Welcome to this presentation of Maximizing Opportunities for Student Success, the Innovation Implementation Cycle. I am Lisa McLachlan. I am the Assessment and Reporting Specialist at the Utah State Board of Education, and I will be working with Rebecca Peterson to present on the Innovation Implementation Cycle to school community councils. And we hope that you'll find this presentation helpful and informative as you make plans at your schools for school improvement and help your students find success. This training will be a brief overview of the Innovation Implementation Cycle. We have talked a little bit about the Innovation Implementation Cycle last year as part of our trainings and provided some additional information on the School Trust Lands training page, which the link is found on the bottom right-hand corner of this slide. This one is going to be just a brief overview of two of the stages, the analyze and understand and the identify needs stages. Rebecca Peterson will be talking about the plan, implement, and monitor and assess process. You'll notice that this cycle does not have a starting point or an end point. So the idea is that one phase will inform the other. You'll find that how you approach each of these stages will differ depending on what phase of the cycle you're in. For example, if you're just beginning your plan, the analyze and understand will look a little bit different than if you're at the end of your plan. But once you get started, the idea is that you just keep going and there's not really an ending point. For the purpose today, we're going to be talking about the analyze and understand part. For this section, we make a couple of assumptions that your council has access to student achievement data, and we'll talk a little bit about student achievement data in just a minute. But the purpose of this is that you'll be able to analyze how to use this data to assess the greatest academic need for your students. As we get started into the analyze and understand section, it would be good to spend just a little bit of time on talking about what are data. So we're going to be using data in this section, and data is generally defined as facts and statistics collected together for reference or analysis. So data could be things that are known or assumed as facts, making the basis of reasoning or calculation. So basically, we are collecting evidence or pieces of information on the thing that we want to know about. For example, in this comic, we have a duck who is testifying that he is not a duck, but the lawyer has been charged to collect evidence to convince the judge that he really is a duck. So some of the evidence that he might be collecting is, does he walk like a duck? Does he quack like the duck? And is trying to say this must be a duck. It's a really silly analogy, but the idea is that he's collecting data and evidence to prove his point, which is this guy is a duck. Usually for school improvement plans, there are two types of data that we'll be collecting on. One would be data on student academic achievement. These could be assessments on student achievement that focus on measuring students' knowledge and skills as outlined by the Utah Core Standards. For the first step in establishing your plan is to identify the greatest academic need. So data on student achievement can help educators identify students who have mastered those skills and students who need more support. And if you've collected data on student achievement, it can help you understand, oh, students are doing really well in science, or they need a little extra help in math, for example. But you have to be able to look at the student achievement data to understand that. And generally, student achievement data is focused on the Utah Core Standards. So you would have information that shows how well the students are meeting those standards. I have provided a 10-minute PowerPoint that talks about what kind of data should we use, and it focused specifically on student achievement data. So we'll just briefly go over some of that information, but if you'd like more information about student achievement data that you can use in your school trust lands plans, please refer to that presentation. We also have some data on program improvement. So as you decide, oh, our students need some more help in math, you are going to be collecting data that shows the changes or program implementation or the techniques that you're using to help those students be better at math. This is some new type of data that we call implementation data that is a critical element of being able to decide whether you're meeting your improvement goals and to be able to measure improvement. These measures can tell if the changes you are making a difference on student achievement, and it tells you where you are and where you are going. According to the School Trust Lands page, the school improvement goals should be focused on the academic needs of students. They need to be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-based. So as you're stating your goals, you should be saying something like, students are going to show an increase of 10 points of growth in math according to the RISE test. You're going to be presenting the data that you're using to establish that goal. So as you're looking at all of your different student achievement data, you'll specifically say, we're going to see improvements in student achievement based on this measure or this assessment. There's no specification about which assessment you can use as long as it's structured on the academic needs of students. And as we talked about, student achievement data is focused on the academic standards. So the assessment should be measuring how students are performing according to those standards. And then you'll simply just say, we'd like to see an increase or an improvement by a certain amount based on that measurement or that assessment. There are a couple of things to keep in mind as you are looking at academic assessments. A good assessment gathers evidence of student learning that informs the teacher's instructional decisions. It provides teachers with information about what students know and can do. And generally, assessments are divided up into two different types. We have formative, which are ongoing assessments that allow teachers to monitor students on a day-to-day basis and modify their teaching on what the students need to be successful. Summative assessments are a snapshot in time that lets the teacher, student, and parents know how well the student has completed the learning tasks and activities. As you are gathering evidence on student achievement, you can use both the formative and the summative assessments. In fact, one thing we've seen are schools that'll use the academic reading or the formerly known as DIBELS assessments. And within that family of assessments, they have both summative and formative assessments. And the formative assessments help the School Trust Lands Council to monitor the effectiveness of their programs because it gives them information on a repeating or ongoing basis on how students are doing. And then they can quickly make adjustments to help those students be successful on the summative or the end of year test. Generally, there's different kinds of formative and summative assessments. We talk more about this in our other presentation on what data you can use, but really quickly, there's just some examples. Again, the Trust Lands Count webpage does not specify what kind of assessments you can use. So here are some examples if you're still looking for ideas on what kind of data would best serve your school's needs. So really quickly, we're going to look at some examples of student achievement data that your School Trust Lands can use. This is from 2018. This is SAGE, the percent proficient students in language arts, math, and science. So students took the SAGE test, and this shows the percentage of students who were proficient or received a proficient score on the assessment. And you'll notice for this particular school, their averages are higher than the district averages, but a little bit lower than the state average, except for science. So if I was looking at this, I would say, it looks like our lowest category is language arts. Our students are doing pretty well in science. They're doing okay in math, but our language arts scores seem to be a little bit lower. In addition to looking at overall averages in your school as compared to the district and the state, you can also look at different demographic groups of your students. For example, Most assessments will allow you to disaggregate data according to race, ethnicity, gender, economic status, language proficiency, or you should have this information in your student databases. And it allows you to take a closer look at which groups of students are doing really well and which ones are struggling with certain subject areas. So as you quickly look at this example, you'll notice that African American and particularly American Indian students are scoring lower than other students in the school. You'll also notice that females are generally doing better than males in language arts and math. They're about the same. Males are generally doing better in science. It's also good to know, like the English language learners, that they tend to do better in science than in math, it looks like, and then students with disabilities. So as you're looking at these percentages, you could identify certain demographic groups that may need a little bit of extra help in certain areas, and it can help you choose which groups or needs you want to focus on. So it's one thing to be able to say that none of our American Indian students have achieved proficiency in any of the subject areas, but it's another thing to be talking about why that is. So as you're looking at your data, it's important to have a conversation about what it is that you see. So what are the academic needs of your students? Why do we believe no American Indian students have achieved proficiency in language arts, math, and science? How do you know what the problem is? What are the symptoms, and what do the symptoms tell you? So symptoms are usually defined as these assessment measures. So we see that students are not being successful as we would like them to. So why is that? It's important to have a good conversation with your counsel, with your principal, with your teachers about what these student academic needs are. And then that leads to some important ideas, is that measures are intended to inform the improvement process. And is your intervention working? Did the changes you make a difference? Are you collecting the right information? What does your data tell you? So the data will tell us that students are struggling, but it's not going to tell us why or what we can do about it. That's something that has to be discussed after you look at your data. So that leads us to our next phase, which is identify the needs and make a plan. Rebecca's going to be talking more about making a plan, but as we're identifying our needs, it's important to identify why students are struggling and what we can do to help them improve. So for example, we're going to be talking a little bit about establishing priorities to focus on for the academic year, and then a little bit of common causes of low academic performance. There's been a lot of research on student achievement and what helps influences student success in schools. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about that research to give you an idea of possible things you can look at as you are trying to help students be successful. As you are looking at your student achievement data, hopefully you'll be able to see some trends, and you can be able to make some assumptions about what the academic needs of the students are. For example, you may notice that most of your third graders are doing really well in math but are struggling in language arts. But the fourth graders have the opposite problem, where they're performing really well in language arts but are struggling in math. Hopefully you'll be able to make some conclusions about which academic areas you want to focus on and how you can help students with their specific needs. And you'll notice that the data does not tell you why third graders are struggling in language arts and the fourth graders are struggling in math. But that'll be part of your discussion as you go with your plans, is that you need to be able to make some assumptions about why students are performing, and then what are you going to do to help treat that. So this conversation tends to lead towards common practices, particularly as you are close to these students and you know what their backgrounds are. It can help inform these decisions. It may be lots of different factors that can influence the student achievement, which we're going to talk about on the next slide. There has been a lot of research on factors that influence student achievement, and generally this research has been focused around 6 different areas. One is the child, which generally focuses on the student's prior knowledge of learning their expectations or degree of openness to learning and experiences. It basically talks about how the student's psyche is prepared to receive instruction and learning situations. The home has generally been classified as influences that parents have on student achievement, particularly their expectations and aspirations for their child. Also, their knowledge of the language of schooling and navigating the school system can have an impact on student achievement. The school is generally defined as the climate of the classroom, such as providing a safe, welcome, caring environment. It can also include peer influences, other students that the student works with and how they influence the child's achievement. The curricula is generally defined as the curriculum that aims for a balance of service and deep understanding. Are we asking those deep questions and helping students develop different learning strategies to construct meaning? Are those strategies planned, deliberate, have explicit and active programs that teach specific learning skills and strategies? And does it help them develop deeper understanding? All of that is kind of defined into the curricula and how things are taught. The teacher is basically defined as the quality of teaching as perceived by the students. It includes teachers' expectations, teachers' conceptions of their learning, teaching, assessment, and the students. For example, the teacher's views on whether all students can progress, whether teachers are prepared to be surprised. Do they participate in having a warm social emotional climate in their classroom where the errors are not only tolerated but welcomed? Do they focus on teacher clarity? Do they make clear expectations about what they want their students to do and achieve? This factor tends to be focused on what teachers can get the students to do in the class rather than what the teacher specifically does. And sometimes that can be based on the teacher's approach to teaching, but it also can be based on the relationship that they've developed in their classroom with their students. So that leads us to the last one, which is basically the approaches to teaching or the teaching techniques that teachers have. And generally, as you are having discussions about what's going to help students be successful, you're going to want to keep in mind all these different areas. It could be that what one student needs to be successful is going to vary depending across subject and age levels, and there could be interactions between these factors. If a child doesn't have a lot of parental expectations at home and is not having a good relationship in the classroom, then obviously that can have a bigger impact on their achievement than whether these situations can counteract or counterbalance each other. Whew, so that was a lot of information about what could possibly influence student achievement, but what really the question is how are your students being affected? What are the academic needs of your students? What are the problems that you are having, and what could be the possible treatments? Again, that's something that you'll have to discuss with your council, particularly with your principal and your teachers. Bring the parents involved. They can all provide insight on what your specific students' needs are. And as you identify those, you can make plans about how you're going to address those needs and what treatments you're going to use. So here's an example of one elementary school's plan, and I'm just going to use this as an example of how this process works and what they've done to not only analyze their data, but also set goals about treatments that are going to help increase student achievement. So the goal that they set says by the end of the year, the percentage of students who are going to be reading at grade level will be as follows. And they've outlined the percentage of per grade level. You'll notice that they're a little bit different. Now, I would assume that when the school sat down and looked at their data, they picked these numbers as realistic goals of what they've previously achieved. So it's possible that, say, 40% of their kindergartners were reading at grade level. And so rather than saying we're going to go from 40% to 100%, they wanted to set a realistic goal of 47%. Now, I'm just making an assumption here because I wasn't part of this process, but I would imagine these numbers were very deliberate. thought out about things that they could realistically achieve by the end of the year. And then it says, additionally, we will decrease behaviors that negatively impacts classroom instruction, allowing for more effective classroom instruction in reading. So it seems that they had a frank discussion about behaviors that they were seeing in the classroom. They've identified some classroom environment issues that were impacting classroom instruction and student learning, and that they're going to deliberately target that particular behavior to help these students make their classroom time more effective. Once you have established your goals, you'll also need to specify which measures you're going to use to measure your goals. Now, in our previous example, if you remember, this particular elementary school has set goals based upon the number or the percentage of students who are going to be reading on grade level. Now, this is what they also put as their measure for that particular goal. They're using Acadience reading or Dibble's data. Some of you may know that Dibble's is now called Acadience reading. Is going to be used throughout the year to identify progress and growth of students. The goals are set using the Pathways of Progress reports, which identify the growth of students from the beginning of the year to the middle of the year assessments. Students with a Pathways of Progress score of 3, 4, or 5 are students who are making typical or above typical growth in 1 year of reading. Now, it's interesting that they choose to use this measure because now we're talking about growth, and the previous goal is actually talking about proficiency. And as you look at student achievement data, you'll notice that there's basically two different kinds. There's, did they meet a certain criteria, which we call proficiency, or are they making progress towards proficiency, which we generally talk about as growth. Both measures are really good to use. This particular goal seems a little bit ambiguous because they're measuring growth to know whether they're reached proficiency, which you can do. But ideally, if you're going to set a growth goal, then you'll measure growth. If you're going to set a proficiency measure, you're going to measure proficiency. So that brings us to the next questions. What kind of data would you collect? So if your goal was to have a set proficiency of students, so we want 60% of our third graders to be reading on grade level, how would you track that? Are you going to be tracking growth, or are you going to be tracking proficiency? How specific does the data need to be? Are you going to do it by student? Are you going to do it by class, by grade, by school? You can set a goal for the entire school, or you can set a goal for specific student groups. The School Trust Lands Council guidelines do not specify what kind of data you're going to use, what student groups you're going to identify, or how you're going to define those academic needs, but it does need to be clear in your steps. And then as you're tracking data on the behaviors that negatively impact classroom instruction, that was part of their goal, is to reduce those negative behaviors and improve instruction. So what other measures or data would you collect? Obviously, this is not student achievement information per se, but it may be classroom climate, it may be classroom observations, it may be the number of referrals to the office. What kind of data would you collect to know that what your current status is of those negative behaviors, and then whether you're making a difference? Also, what kind of other measures would you collect? This brings us to the other part of the goal as you're submitting, is that you have to have an action plan and information on what you're going to spend money on. So in this particular elementary schools, these are their action plan steps. So they've identified a specific area, they've identified the measure they're going to use, and then this is what they're going to do to increase student achievement. They've got professional development. Teachers will participate in a monthly district guided PD, which supports effective planning and instruction. They're also going to attend PLCs, and they're going to use School Trust Lands money to pay for substitutes to cover their classes while they attend these professional development opportunities. They're going to pay for paraprofessionals, and paraprofessionals are going to be working under the direction of the teacher and are going to be hired to administer the Dibbles or the Acadience reading assessment. They're also going to be providing instruction in small groups, and they're going to be doing progress monitoring. They're also going to have some reading activities. They're going to bring parents out for a literacy night, and they're going to have other activities that will provide support for reading skills for their children while they're learning at school. They're also going to buy some Chromebooks that they can use to access software and online learning resources such as Imagine Learning, Wonders reading programs that can be used in the classroom. They're also going to be sending members of the leadership team to the UMTSS conference, which is going to help them provide additional information on implementation techniques that they can use in common behavior management systems. This looks like it's specifically geared towards that behavioral goal that they set. They're also going to be printing materials for Literacy Night and activities of student data books that will support family involvement in student learning. So it's a very detailed action plan steps. And as you're reviewing these action plan steps, the next question is, what kind of data would you collect to look at? And here we go back to our improvement cycle. This has been modified just a little bit in that we have put in the action plan steps to our cycle. So our goal is focused around the student achievement data, which is Acadience reading or DIBELS. But there's also all of these different interventions and actions plans that we are doing to see whether we can improve student achievement on reading. So you could be collecting data on how well the professional development went for the teachers. You could be gathering information about the different techniques that they did based on the learning at those professional developments. You could be collecting information on the paraprofessionals about what techniques they use for small group instruction, how many assessments they've administered, how many classes they substituted for while the teachers were gone to professional learnings, basically how they're using their time. Could also be measuring the success of the Literacy Night. Did we get a large turnout? Did we print off a lot of books? Did we have a lot of questions from parents about the techniques that they could use at home to help improve literacy? How much money did we spend on supplies and technology? Has that technology been used? Are we getting the different programs and the support that the teachers need in the classrooms on that technology? How well was the UMTSS conference received? Did they provide the information that we needed to meet our students' needs? So these are all different examples of implementation data that we would collect as part of our goal. And we don't necessarily submit this data as part of our plan, but it's something that we would need to look at to know whether we've actually met our goal. Did what we were doing make a difference? And it's basically a cyclical process. As you go through this process, you'll notice that at the beginning, as we were setting our goals, all we looked at was student achievement data. But as we set plans and collect data on whether those plans have been effective, we're also going to be looking at the implementation data on whether we need to make adjustments to that plan. And ideally, at the end of the year, as you're reviewing this information, or periodically throughout the year, you can be making assumptions about whether what you did made a difference. And you can make connections on your action plan steps and whether that increased student achievement. And as you are having these discussions, it can also lead to the next planning steps. And you would use that information to improve your goal, change your goal, keep your goal the same, but maybe do different techniques to improve it. And that is how you participate in this implementation cycle. Unfortunately, we are out of time. So this has just been a brief overview of the Analyze and Understand sections and Identify Needs sections of your improvement plans. As we've mentioned, they are interchangeable and they can be part of a cyclical process, both at the beginning of the year, at the end of the year, and as you're planning for the next year. If you have additional questions about this process or would like some assistance on interpreting assessment results or using that data to inform your school improvement plans and instruction in the classroom, feel free to contact me. I'm happy to help. My contact information is listed on this slide. And I wish you the best of luck as you are planning improvement plans for your school. I think it's great that we've got councils involved and we can bring parents in on this process, because I know that, as they say, it takes a community to raise a child. And it's great to have all this outside perspective and collaboration with teachers and schools to know that what we're doing is really best for our students. So happy implementing